That's all for the club's questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, she went first. Yep. And at this point, what we're going to do is turn to the audience for other questions that they might have. And do you want to do the closing first? Oh, okay. Okay, so we're going to give 2 minutes for the closing statements, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience. Okay, so Paul, you get to start again.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for the invitation to come here tonight. It has been great meeting those of you who I have met, and I look forward to meeting the rest of you following the forum. In closing, I just want to kind of sum up my guiding principles. In general, I'm about investing in people. And when you look out to, and I know I talk a lot about California today and where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years, but as long as you invest in people, you're going to get where you need to go. And that's education. And that's building our infrastructure. The issues that we're facing today, and this is where my concern really kind of, I turn it up a notch, because our competition today, it's not really the world just yet. But in about 10 years or 20 years, watch out, because the BLS had said that our jobs of the future in the U.S. are going to be either high-paying, high-skill, or low-paying, low-skill. I think we've all heard that before. The problem is, you've got to be so well educated, and you have to have an infrastructure that is so efficient that you draw companies to you. I don't know if you noticed, but Occidental Petroleum just moved their, or announced they're going to move their headquarters to Houston. And Governor Rick Perry is actually in Southern California trying to get more companies to go to move to Texas as well. So we're fighting our own states. It's going to get worse as we try to fight off other countries, and we debate for these kinds of jobs that we have to have. So it's about schools, it's about infrastructure, because that's going to bridge this kind of short-term gap. You need to get past the next 2, 3, 4 years before you start seeing the effect of something like Common Core. You need to make sure that your graduates are not burdened unduly with debt. You need to also make sure that our UC system and our Cal State stay strong. Done. Thank you.
Simona, you got 2 minutes.
In closing, I have to start by thanking my daughter Jade, who has been a wonderful child in this setting, and my husband, who has put up with me. That was worth 10 seconds. I'm running for elected office because I want to represent you. I want to go to Sacramento, and I want to be your voice. I understand, as I said, as a child of justice, freedom is not free. I am here today because other people stood up and said, we want quality education, we want safe communities, we want medical care, good medical care, not bad doctors who are protected by MICRA. So there are things that I believe in. I actually have a firm, we have 10 lawyers. I have an obligation to a bunch of people to deliver their paychecks and so that they can feed their families. I have an obligation to my family to make sure that they are educated. I know what it is like to be burdened with student loans. I had that, and somehow I have figured out a way to pay that, to be successful, send my daughter, who's the one who's not here, to college. I'm so proud of her. She's going to graduate from Stanford this year, and demand excellence. We need to chart a course of excellence for the future. We need to keep our eye on the ball, and it is hard work, but we have to roll up our sleeves and stop giving sort of, one-size-fits-all solutions and get to the real work that is going to put California back on a positive track economically, educationally, and in every other respect. This is the greatest state in this nation.
You've heard from 4 candidates tonight, but, and I commend everyone who is sitting at this table, fielding all the questions, but I think it's important, if I were in your seat, to really look at someone who has a proven record of leadership. I have dedicated 25 years of my life to community service. And again, I repeat myself, I probably have served on 20 boards throughout this district. I've lived in the 62nd for over 30 years. I raised 2 children. I served on a school board for 8 years, so I have education experience. I'm a healthcare administrator. I have healthcare experience. I serve on a water board, so I have water and environmental experience. And my model in terms of creating legislation, policy, would be to really come out and meet with folks. I think it's important that you see your legislator. You need to hold people accountable. I think that's very important. I want to be in partnership with you to create the kind of 62nd Assembly District that you want. I have the experience, I have the leadership, I have the commitment, I have the passion, I have the work ethics that all of us need, and we need to work together. So I ask for your support so we can move this district forward, and I am there with you. I will be visible. I will not be on just the other side of the freeway, as some people refer to. I will represent the entire community, and that's what you need. Thank you.
So like we've all said, being a state assembly member is incredibly important. But let's also be clear. No one on this dais has ever been a state assembly person before. There's only one person in this room who has, and it's Betsy Butler. So, and we can give her a round of applause. So none of us have been there. But there is a passion, obviously, for this district, and I appreciate it from everybody on this dais. And it is state legislation. But it's state legislation with home in mind. It's state legislation with your community in mind. So that should be our priority, is representing you. It is the state, but you're the first priority. This is home. We may be gone from Monday through Thursday as state assembly people, but it is you who will keep us grounded. It is you who will remind us what's really important. And that is why I want to represent you. I don't just want your endorsement, I want to start a partnership with you. And that's my goal here.
Okay, now we will open it up to the audience questions. So if you were interested in asking a question, yeah, then please raise your hand and we will bring the microphone to you. And please limit any speeches or statements and get to the question as soon as possible. And candidates, please limit your answers to 30 seconds. Okay.
I wanted to ask you about the big brain and seeing homelessness as an issue that more out of the box thinking, more of a private-public partnership. For example, would you consider legislation that if the building is vacant, that you can then remain seated to take permanently and have more like a habitat and humanity style process to slowly participate in renovating the building and get first dibs at that. And that kind of partnership. Or what is it as you go into this job and if we people off tomorrow, what is your thoughts on this? Is it just a traditional program that quite often don't work, or something different?
Simona, why don't you start with this one?
Thanks. So there are some programs and some models that work. They may or may not be government programs. For instance, if you're dealing with the issue of teens who have aged out of foster care, there are community organizations who absolutely have helped them find a home, get the skills that they need in order to learn a trade, go to college, and get their life on track. But simply aging children out of foster care has created a tremendous amount of the homeless population. The issue of mental illness, that's what I was saying. If people need treatment, there are other community organizations. What we find, though, is that our state doesn't invest the money to partner with those programs that actually work. So we need programs that work.
Yeah, my comment would be that the alternative that you gave is a very good one, and that's why I always support a model of talking to people, because we can come up with solutions, and I don't have the answer to everything, and that's why I said we really need to partner together to come up with programs and alternatives and suggestions that would help eliminate or mitigate that problem as much as we could.
So I go to the sheriff meetings about homelessness on the west side. And I've spent a lot, and they're incredibly interesting, and they have actually really opened my eyes to the issues and how important it is to have public-private partnership, especially on this side of town. I found that at the meetings, that the actual businesses of the community really did want to participate in both the cleanup, offering to donate bins for cleanup behind the homeless. There are companies and there are businesses in the community that want to participate. We just haven't connected them, and it's important that we do that.
That's a great, I like that example a lot, and I think that those kind of public-private endeavors work. They have been proven successful, and I always remember the first one that I ever read about was New York City Bedford-Stuyvesant, way back when. You're from New York, you know. I think those are great, and I think you're absolutely right that you have to think outside of the box, because if you kind of fall back on the old, well, let's just do job training and let's set up a homeless shelter, you're not giving that person the opportunity to grow for himself or herself. So kudos, and I like that.
Okay. Next question.
I have a question about prisons, and I'm going to try very hard not to lead you towards an answer. Moving past Governor Brown's struggle with overcrowding, imagine we get past that without any more huge hiccups. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the prison industrial complex and the private prison industry in particular. This is sort of an open question that I leave to you to answer in your own creative way.
Gloria,
So-
why don't you start?
I don't support privatizing prisons. I don't support that issue. Again, it's a very complex issue. You have to look at it and, really research it and be able to make recommendations that make sense based on, so I would have to research it, but I just don't support privatizing it or moving it out of the state of California, if that was one of your questions that you asked about it.
I also don't support privatizing the jails either. I mean, quite frankly, that is a public service that you do not want based on profit. I do, however, I am a strong proponent for rehabilitation. I think it's tremendously important to the community, and I think it's something we really should support.
I agree. When you privatize anything, like I said earlier, like with the schools, for instance, prisons are they're a market failure. They're not going to make money. But when you start privatizing it, that's the target. It's a profit for whoever owns that prison. So I'm against that, because you kind of go against the principle that you're trying to, A, deter that kind of behavior, B, provide that person with the opportunity to get additional education, because a lot of people are illiterate who are in prison, and C, you're giving them the chance to rehabilitate, because you have a lot of people who are in for drug problems as well.
So I'm fully against the prison industrial complex. It is a pipeline. Instead of educating our children, in fact, we are making choices that are locking up children. We know that people end up in prison because, in large part, that we have had failures of education. That's a separate topic which we talked about earlier. It costs $50,000 a year to lock up somebody. We could educate our children for the same amount. Our economy would be better because we would have citizens who have skills, who have education, and who are contributing. And when we lock up people, we ruin families and we ruin communities, and we really have got to address it.
Okay.
The current medical malpractice laws limit recovery to about $250,000. It's been that way for decades. The purchasing power of $250,000 now is the equivalent of about $75,000 when the law was passed. Do you favor raising those limits? Do you favor putting in like a cost of living escalator so that it's not so unfair? Finally, the threat of litigation acts as a sort of second layer of regulation that many times businesses are not, they're more afraid of lawyers than they are of regulators. Your thoughts on that, please.
Let's start with Autumn. Can you repeat the last
Just
Well,
the last little sentence. I'm sorry, I missed the last part. I'm ready for the rest of it.
Oh, the last part was simply that the fear of litigation may have more effect on regulating behavior of businesses than
Okay.
government
I'm not sure
agencies
that's a
that do the
micro issue, but-
regulating.
On MICRA, I've really studied the history of MICRA, and for those who aren't aware, it was put in place because OBGYNs were leaving the state of California and women were not able to get access to service. And women were going 4 hours to deliver babies. It was hard to get access to service. So for me right now, the MICRA cap for me needs to stay in place because there are a lot of people in this community that do not have access to transportation where they can take hours to get to a clinic or to a doctor. They have to get on the bus. And so for me, access is a priority over lawyers making more money.
I agree that we need to make sure that there is access across the board, especially as you're starting to bring more and more people into the healthcare system. I don't mind there being a COLA, some kind of cost of living increase based on, the federal government, the BLS, whatever, some kind of cost of living increase to raise that cap if need be. But again, I want to really, to be honest, I'm not that familiar with this issue, so I'd have to take a hard look at it to understand a little better.
MICRA really limits liability, I think, to $250,000 per case. And I know that there are some people who have issues with that because there are some injuries that may be life-threatening or whatever. But I do favor some cost of living adjustment to MICRA to that $250,000 ceiling. And I think that's kind of the real issue. I know the next speaker will probably have a different perspective on it. But I think we do need to get liability issues in place and so forth. So I do support the $250,000 cap, but with some adjustment in terms of the cost of living.
So MICRA shields bad doctors who kill people and who hurt people. And the brunt of that is on the backs of women who have no income, elderly people who lived on a fixed income, and children who are killed and they never have a paycheck. I'm a lawyer and I get hundreds of calls every year, and I tell people that if your mother died in childbirth, we cannot represent you unless she had a paycheck, because for $250,000, no lawyer can afford to take that case. It costs $150,000 in experts, and by the time you have attorney fees. So bad doctors are allowed to practice bad medicine without any check, regulation, or consequence.
Okay, is that it? Oh, one.
Me. So I've listened to all the wonderful responses to the general questions, and I'd like you to think of this because you only have 30 seconds. What unique or something that's been burning in you to do, if you got this, what unique program is different than the ones that you've answered that you would bring to this particular job in this particular constituency?
Paul, you're up.
Go. I would say one of the first things I would do out of the gate is make a sincere effort to address the drought that we're going through right now. There's a lot of things that we can do and that we should be doing. For instance, there's upwards of nearly 300,000 homes and businesses that don't have water meters on them throughout the state. So they're basically using water willy-nilly. We also can look at other options like drip irrigation for agriculture. We can look at how to try to make the pipelines more efficient so they're not losing as much leakage. In general, if we don't address that pretty quickly, food's going to go up.
Two things. We have got to dedicate ourselves to getting California back to having the best education system in the nation. But we've talked about that. The thing we haven't talked about is our courts. I am a child who grew up in a household with domestic violence. We have balanced the budget in part on the backs of our court. There are women today who are suffering in violence and children who are suffering in violence. And if they try and go to court tomorrow, we have closed 60 courtrooms in Los Angeles County. They cannot get a TRO, they cannot get some relief, and they will continue to live in fear, and we have got to address that situation. We cannot have one branch of government underfunded and not working. That is a core of our democracy, and we've got to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Simona. there's so many issues, and I think we've all talked about them tonight, but water is a real issue, big issue right now. I mean, the governor has declared an emergency drought, and it will impact you at your home when you go to the store, because we truly are, water reliability is really a big issue. You cannot guarantee that you're going to have the kind of the water that you do have right now. We may have a mandatory that you conserve water, but what I think is important also is that right now the state is in pretty good shape. It has a reserve, and you need someone to go up there that have the experience, that knows how to
Wrap it up.
make sure that you're represented in terms of when those reserve monies are given out.
Besides the things we've already talked about, transparency. I think that one of the great things I've seen recently is Control Panel LA, which provides a tremendous amount of transparency to the check register of LA City. And what that transparency allows you to see is where there's been waste in pension spending and not gone to pensions, where we have wasted money on not grouping telephone plans. And that money adds up. It adds up to hundreds of millions of dollars that are taken away from in-home services and schools and courts and all the important services we really do need. So transparency.
Okay. Who has the microphone? Who's next? Okay.
So, Governor Brown's proposed budget for the next fiscal year has a total general fund capacity that in inflation-adjusted dollars is still below the budget of 2007-2008. Services have been cut. They have not been restored. The governor has resisted restoring many of those services. Adult, dental, Medicaid just got restored, but there was a year delay. There are many other examples. I believe this is the only state in the nation that still doesn't have an emergency poison control system. How will you, going to Sacramento, fight to restore the services that the people of the state continue to need? Or will you prioritize the reserve and the paying down of debt as the governor has supported?
Please, let's let Simona start. And
So your question brings up exactly why I'm running. People don't have much of a voice in Sacramento. The truth of the matter is we can talk about these important people issues here in our community, but the governor's political will to prioritize people over corporate donors does not exist. He's trying to get reelected, and so he is doing things that are going to be politically expedient and devastating for people and devastating for our communities. He has balanced the budget on the backs of the people who are the most vulnerable, and someone has to go up and not worry about reelection and open their mouth and say, this is wrong and this is, it has to stop.
okay, Gloria.
You have to have a strong advocate, because there is a reserve right now. I think part of it will go to pay off the debt, and then a rainy day fund, and then the other third, you've got to fight for it. That's why you need somebody who has the experience and will stand up and fight for you. Yes, those cuts need to be restored first. You have to restore those cuts because they affected everyday people. So that's the first thing that I would do, to fight for those cuts to be restored and the other issues that we've been talking about tonight.
I think Gloria is right. I think that you have to fight for that money, and I think the first place that money should go is to services. I am a huge proponent of in-home care services, obviously education, and you'll have to fight for those dollars. And by the way, we're going to have to create some other streams, because that reserve that was built based on investments will not happen every year. So if we do not create a new stream of revenue into our general service funds, there won't be any money to fight for.
Yeah, I agree that some of that, I think it's just under $2 billion in reserve, should be unlocked and spent on this essential services that have been cut. I think that we're also at the point where, as you were mentioning, part of this budget, even though it's reduced from 2007 actual dollars, is the result of a tax windfall that we had last year. So we're in a good position. I think that we're also in a very good position because borrowing costs are very low right now. So I don't mind that reserve goes away and we spend it on something right now, but again, we got to go out more than a couple of years past the next election cycle.
Okay.
Next question. So I have a couple questions for Gloria Gray. One is, why did you not return the Sierra Club questionnaire if you have such an impressive environmental record? And another, I notice you're related to the Southern California Water Committee. I have a letter here where that committee opposes stricter standards for the toxic water pollutants perchlorate. And do you usually support the policies of the Southern California Water Committee?
Okay, before you answer that, let me turn to the president and ask, are we taking personal questions or only questions for the whole panel? Yes, sir.
I didn't know we were going to do personal things there at all. And I've been to this club in Westmore, and I live in Playa Del Rey and the whole bit. I didn't know that we were going to do that. And I don't think when I was further.
Yeah, we didn't know either, so.
Bring up all kinds of things that we don't need that. We don't need no friends with Democrats.
What about research?
Okay.
Questionnaires, interviews?
So. Okay, so if you'd like to rephrase it so that everyone can answer, that would be fine.
Do you believe that water agencies should look after the public health by getting the best level possible of not allowing pollutants over that level in the water? Or should one agree with the Southern California Water Committee, which wants to apparently sell as much water as possible?
Bruce, can you restate the question easily in one sentence? Because they don't understand the question, so.
I guess move on, since there's fierce resistance to looking into the person talking about their record.
Okay.
Essentially, the question is this. How stringent do you think water quality requirements should be? And his feel is that the local water board, as expressed, is not that stringent. That the requirements of rules and keeping pollutants out of the water aren't as important for the local water district board themselves on the water. Right? Essentially, the question. So, I think that's it.
Okay, Gloria, why don't you start?
I don't feel that's true. I mean, water quality is an issue for any water agency. You know, West Basin sells water to municipalities and private companies, so water quality issue is of utmost importance. So I'm not sure where your statement is coming from and what that really means. That's just an issue that we're regulated in terms of the way we treat water. Water is treated based on regulations and standards. So water quality certainly is an issue that's important to any water agency. If that was the question.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, definitely water quality is important. But you know, one thing, actually, I'm going to digress a little bit from the question and talk about actually some of our infrastructure dealing with water. Recently, we had a little bit of rain, and I think it's also important that we start to address our stormwater, because I think that causes a lot of pollution, at least in our oceans. So, I mean, if we're going to talk about cleaning water, I think that's something we should address, and is a basic infrastructure problem that we have right now.
Absolutely. Everything Autumn said. Water has got to stay clean. It's got to remain a priority. It's going into our bodies. There's so much coming in that we're consuming these days. Look at the GMO labeling thing that didn't go through a couple years ago. I mean, this is just, it's got to end. So water quality is something that's pure and essential. It's a public good. Same thing. It's a right that we all expect, and it needs to be clean.
So just like freedom is not free, safety is not guaranteed. You have to fight for it. The problem with water is that it is not regulated enough, and it's regulated after the fact. Anybody can start tomorrow and put anything in our water that they want to, and then we can decide and regulate after the fact that it is not safe. Water testing standards are not stringent enough, and this is a huge issue. We are poisoning our children through the water because we allow anybody to put anything down the drain. We clean it with outdated standards, and then we say it is safe, and it is not until it causes a community epidemic that we realize it's too late and the damage is already done. We have to fight for safety.
All right, we're going to have Brian, then Joyce, Kelly, and Susan, and that'll be it.
Okay, so 3 last
Then we
questions.
have to count these ballots.
All right. So my question is about the Affordable Care Act and also what we do here in this.
Hold on 1 second. Yeah. Okay.
My question is about the Affordable Care Act and then also our choices here in California. Under the Affordable Care Act, each state, of course, can make its own decisions as long as they meet the federal regulations. And so currently we have covered California, and over the near future, we'll see how that's working out for our state. And so my question going forward, when we go to make changes to it to hopefully improve it and make it better, is would you support a single-payer health plan for California? And if not, would you keep covered California the way it is? And if not, what changes would you make? Like, what direction would our healthcare system go?
First of all, yes, I am a definite proponent for single-payer system. I think that actually we were in this exact building when we had a West LA Dem Club a seminar on Affordable Care Act and on the single-payer system, and the fact that health insurance is based on employment to me is an injustice. I think the Affordable Care Act, I think it is working in California, and I have covered California. I have a pre-existing condition that doesn't affect me on a day-to-day basis, but it makes insurance really expensive for me, and so I'm a proud covered California user.
Hold on, Sarah.
I certainly
Let's go around in the...
Okay. I was like, did we just start going counterclockwise? I'm just kidding, Gloria. The single payer is a great question. I would rather see, though, how the ACA plays out. I think the biggest problem with it initially, excluding the execution and the rollout of it, is the fact that we didn't have people on both sides of the aisle participating in the debate to try to form it a little better. I think there are some big issues with it with regards to the costing, with regards to the administrative burden that's put on doctors. So you don't know what's wrong with it until you see it rolled out, and I think we'll learn from it. Single payer could be an option in the future, though, if it's a thud.
Thank you for the question. This is a personal issue to me, number one, because as a law student, I had my first baby, and I didn't have health insurance. And I understand what it is like to need medical care and not be able to get it because you don't have a job and you don't have health insurance. But I also have the responsibility of 30 people for their health insurance and the health insurance of their families. The covered California is new. I am sure that it is not going to be perfect. I'm glad to see that it's moving in a positive direction, and what we always have to work for is to get as many people getting good medical care that is affordable, that does not bankrupt working families.
Covered California is a godsend for so many people who did not have health care. Yes, it still has some issues, but more people are becoming part of that system now. They're working through it. Unfortunately, you're right, the Republicans are kind of looking at it differently, and so hopefully it does not get repealed. We need health insurance. Single payer, I think, is an option to look at in the future, but certainly Affordable Health Care Act, I think, was a godsend to this community.
Okay. Second to last question.
Oh, I think it's me. Oh, okay, yeah. Yes, my question is on transportation. I don't mean the bullet train to nowhere that they're dealing with in the Sacramento. I meant the local transportation. A number of areas that we are in here have really not been addressed by that. They're building all over the place and they're putting rails in here and there, but a lot of areas are being bypassed. I'd like to know what you would do about that.
So, Paul, why don't you start?
And when you say bypass, you mean there are areas that are not getting the light rail, for instance?
That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think a lot of that actually has to do with some of the neighborhoods did not want it coming through. The solution in those cases, though, is to take an overall picture and try to figure out what is this going to look like in 5 or 6 years, because I don't even know what it's going to look like. I don't think anybody does, but I think at that point you need to come back and address where the gaps are, because you're right, this thing is not going to be universal throughout the city, similar to what we had years ago. So it needs to have a little bit more thought put into it, I think, but same idea. You roll it out and then you can adjust it.
I'm a child of public transportation. My mother worked for the Chicago Transit Authority for 30 years, okay? Major metropolitan cities all over the world have effective, workable public transportation systems. And the problem that we have in part is we do not have the political will to get it done. For my employees, I actually pay for them to take public transportation, but I will not pay for them to drive their car. So there are a lot of things that we can do to support and encourage a workable public transportation system, but we have to have the will to do it.
And that will to do it really includes community participation. You're right. What rails are placed in communities really has to do with a lot of political influence. And so you have to go to those meetings. You have to be involved. You have to be an advocate for yourself and your community. And so it really is a partnership working together and with your legislator to see what other areas that person could be helpful to you in. But you have to be involved. Community participant.
And I would agree with Gloria. You have to be involved, but you are involved. You're here now, and you're talking to one of us will be your representative, and you are so you've started the conversation, and it is tremendously important to have access to transportation. We need to expand it. It needs to happen sooner rather than later, and quite frankly, I think if it's not addressed within the next 5 years, I think that our infrastructure can't handle all the traffic and all the new cars. It just can't. I mean, we see Lincoln, you see Abbott Kinney, you see what's going on in just this community alone.
Okay, and ladies and gentlemen, our last question. Oh, 2 more.
I get into this argument with a couple of friends of mine who are in the film industry all the time, and our mayor has discussed this, and it came up earlier tonight. The United States is 50 states, 50 little experiments in democracy. Which one leads the path to zero taxation, zero regulation, zero everything? If Oxy is moving to Texas and the film industry is moving to Louisiana, what's the limit on the race to the bottom on income and regulation and workplace safety and everything else so that we can hold on to corporations if they're not actually putting anything in except our salaries, which we then are the sole taxpayers of back to the coffers of the state?
What's your question?
What's the limit on the race to the bottom? I want to hear somebody define where you stop giving it away.
So this...
I think I understand the question. When do you stop with all the tax incentives and continue to run the state on the backs of the people? Is that the question? Yeah. Thank you. I understand your question, Kelly. And I think, at least I understand the question, right? I'm one step ahead. So, I think there's a balance. I mean, clearly we cannot continue to run the state on the backs of the people, and we do. We run the airport on the backs of the people. We run the hotels on the backs of the people. It is a tremendous issue. However, we do need to create an environment that companies and services, companies come here, so we have general services. So there has to be some balance. But the balance should never be on the backs of people. It should be on, and they're saying stop. This is such a complicated question to answer in 30 seconds. But quite frankly, I think, the truth is that.
Autumn? Yeah.
The question, which has to count for some.
Do you want Paul? Yeah.
Great question. To be honest, I don't think anybody knows where the bottom is. That's why I'm saying it's imperative that we start getting very smart about making ourselves smarter, more innovative, more efficient, because in 10 years or 20 years, Apple may not still be in California. Google may not stay here, because they're going to go someplace else that's cheaper. The talent's going to be just as good in 10 or 20 years. You look at China, what China's doing, it's kind of amazing. They're building 10 or 12 universities that are supposedly, according to the Chinese at least, going to be on parallel with MIT. That's the kind of competition we're facing.
We are past the bottom when 32 of 100 students who start in 9th grade are not college ready. We are past the bottom when opportunity means a college education saddles you for half your life with student loan debt. We are past the bottom when we have people who have laid down their lives for this country sleeping on the streets. We are past the bottom when we believe that we cannot move forward. So we are past the bottom, but it is time for us to move forward, take the lead, and demand accountability from the people that we send to represent us.
I want to echo Simona's comment, because we are past the bottom, but the issues are so important because you have to send somebody to Sacramento to deal with the bottom. You've got to have balance. And so all the issues we've talked about, you have to have somebody in Sacramento that's going to address all those issues that made us be at the bottom.
Okay. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one last question. That's what I meant. That's what I was saying.
California's supposed to be the entertainment capital of the world, yet massive amounts of film production are leaving this state, partly because of the incentives they're getting. What can we do as a state to bring the industry back? And how do we do it without bankrupting ourselves at the same time?
Well, I think that goes to the balance question. You've got to balance it. You want to bring them back, but you don't want us to be at the bottom, the everyday person suffering. So it's got to be a balance. Because yes, companies bring jobs to this state, but it also creates some other issues, so it's got to be a balance.
I think that, listen, I understand what they mean by we're past the bottom. But we've lost an industry that not only is our entertainment industry, but as a result, some of our tourism. So although I know that we don't want to obviously have the system work on the backs of people, but we do want to encourage our number one industry, tourism and entertainment, to grow here and flourish here.
Tough question. I was actually just reading today that California is 4th in terms of major motion picture production. We're behind Louisiana, Canada, and the United Kingdom. And it's a very tough question. I think you've got to make Southern California, the most attractive place for people to shoot movies. And what may ultimately happen is that we may segment off and we kind of specialize. So maybe we will remain the capital of film schools. Maybe we'll remain the capital of editing. We don't know yet. But I think a lot of the problem has to come from, again, the talent is going to dictate where a lot of companies go.
And Simona, you get the last word.
Thank you. So this issue is an issue of missed opportunity. The LA 2020, Where Do We Want to Be in 2020 report said we have everything we need to take back the lead in this respect. But the tourism industry by the county of LA is riddled in regulation, and it is just too difficult. It's not, you don't need clean water to shoot a movie. I'm sorry. This is a place where we probably could have less regulation. I'm from Chicago. People want to come to California. They do not want to live in 1-degree weather, okay? We have every condition here to be on top. The Louisiana is not the new Hollywood. Don't get it twisted. Really, we can do this.
Okay, so at this point, I just want to thank everyone for allowing me to moderate this. As a teacher, I get very excited for learning opportunities, and this was definitely a learning opportunity. And let me tell you that even though I stood here for 2 hours and I'm very tired, I don't think it was half the amount of work that these candidates do. So why don't we give them another round of applause? Thank you.
I have two. Yeah, and I thank you very much, Lauren. Lauren did a great job. Let's give him another. I want all of those, everyone who has a ballot, we'll give you a little bit of time again. We want to thank Paul Kouri, Simona Farrise, Gloria Gray, and Autumn Burke. All right, so the ballot box is there in the corner. Please mark your ballot, and as soon as we adjourn, we will begin. We'll give you 10 minutes to get your ballots in. And also, I want to remind everyone here who has possibly not renewed your membership. I know some of you were disappointed. You came in to get a ballot, but you hadn't renewed. You know, you need 45 days. Wednesday the 19th, I think it's the Wednesday the 19th is your last day to renew your dues to be able to vote in the May 3rd election. Or Tracy, is that to join by the 19th? Tracy, is it joining by the 19th? Oh yeah, joining by the 19th. To be eligible for the May thing. Nick? Oh, to win the endorsement, you have to have 60%. Everyone, to win the endorsement tonight, and in any of our elections, you need 60% of the votes cast. No endorsement is also a possibility, and it counts as a vote. Thank you. I think we're adjourned. Yeah, I'm surprised about the human trafficking, because that's in our party platform.
Anyway, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you were great.
I need to take a picture, I guess, with other candidates.
Yes, absolutely, please.